The big international story this morning, it's gearing up to be an explosive week in Washington as Republican lawmakers challenge Joe Biden's election win. Now, last week, 11 Senate Republicans announced their intention to object to the electoral college results that gave U.S. President-elect Joe Biden those 306 votes over Donald Trump's 232. Now they are calling on the U.S. Senate to appoint an electoral commission to conduct an emergency 10-day audit of the results in disputed states. Now, in Georgia, the results of a runoff election that could shape the first years of a Biden presidency will be known in a day or two, we're told. Dr. Dinesh Sharma joins us now from New York. Good evening to you, Dr. Sharma. Thanks so much for staying up for us here in Johannesburg on this Wednesday morning here. Georgia is certainly the big story in the U.S. this morning. In terms of those Senate votes that are set to take place, it's going to have a big impact depending on which way those votes go. What's the latest there?
So Warnock is ahead, I believe, by a percentage point or two. It's been back and forth. We're still waiting for Mr. Ossoff to take potentially an edge, as I believe the DeKalb County returns come in. So yeah. I think it'll be a long night, but so we're waiting to see. And I think the hopes are high on the part of the Democrats because they've been organizing on the ground, but it's anybody's guess what's going to happen. I think the Republicans are also motivated. Certainly the demographics that I saw suggested that the older demographics were aiming for the Republican candidates and were out in larger numbers than compared to November, whereas the younger demographics, 25 and below, were obviously more motivated for Ossoff and Warnock, but the numbers may not be as strong as they were in November for the younger demographic vote that tends to lean Democratic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is unfolding now. I mean, where you are, it's just a few minutes away from midnight. But is this going to be a through-the-night session?
Yeah, in Georgia, I think the polls close around 7:30, 8 o'clock here. And of course, the counties come in, individually in a staggered way, because all elections are at the state level. They're decentralized. So every county sends in its own returns, which is then tallied and then reported out through the channels and so on and so forth. So as you know, in the general election, there were recounts and audits. In the state of Georgia for the general election, I think there were 3 different audits. So Mr. Biden has won thrice already in the state of Georgia, as he was saying just yesterday when he was rallying for the Senate candidates. But obviously, Mr. Trump is still not conceding, as he said in the rally yesterday in Georgia, as well as on the 1-hour phone call that he had with the Secretary of State of Georgia, Mr. Raffensperger, basically asking him to find 11,780 votes, roughly 12,000 votes that he needed to declare himself the winner in Georgia, to overturn the returns, as well as the Electoral College, which is about to certify Mr. Biden tomorrow around 1 o'clock in a joint session that will be presided by Vice President Pence. As we talked about it, I think several weeks ago, I think we said how on January 6th, which is like a pro forma event in any election, Vice President Pence resides over both houses, both chambers of Congress, House as well as the Senate. 2 boxes of certified results are brought into the chamber, and they're basically counted out loud for every state. But Mr. Trump tweeted that VP Pence has the power to reject the legally certified electors, which is, factually not true. And then he also said the Constitution gives Mr. Pence the right to overturn the election, which is also not true. So that's kind of where we are. We're in this kind of, parallel universe that Mr. Trump has tried to create, apart from the legal procedures that everybody's following. But as you said, there are about a dozen. They're now known as a dirty dozen, approximately 12 to 14 senators, including Mr. Cruz and Hawley, who are leading the charge against decertifying or not verifying the election results and calling for a commission. to investigate and audit yet one more time in specific states. They're not calling for like a national audit, but they're calling for challenges in particular states, like obviously the battleground states, so Georgia being one of them, Pennsylvania, potentially a few other states that are battleground states that were key to Mr. Biden's win.
Yeah, I mean, that joint session of Congress that you just talked about, just hours away now. I mean, what do we know about whether there is real support, real tangible support from Republicans, other than, the handful that have come out in support of President Trump's efforts to overturn these November election results? Is this a real issue as we head into that joint session?
Well, yeah, it's become a real issue. It's a bit, it's clearly a bit of a kabuki theater in the sense that everybody, and I've heard a senator talk about this just recently on live air and as also in print and in radio commentaries and so on and so forth. Yeah. So majority of Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, who's the speaker really, or the person in charge of calling the Senate into session, he has said not to do this because the House is controlled by the Democrats. And there's no way any objection, besides the 2-hour discussion that they're allowed in their private chambers, that this discussion will lead to any kind of a substantive change. And I think everybody knows that Mr. Trump has lost the election, but for 2024 and 2022 elections, a few of the Republicans, GOP senators are grandstanding to make the claim that Mr. Trump has been drumming up that somehow this election was fraudulently taken from him, which is factually has been proven, I think, roughly in 60 cases that have been brought in front of local district justices and judges. And in every instance, except for one in Pennsylvania or two, maybe, cases, all of the cases have been thrown out based on no evidence or lack of evidence. So there really isn't a substantive case here. Mr. Cruz is a lawyer trained at Harvard. Mr. Hawley is a lawyer, senator trained at Yale Law School. These are the elite law schools in the country that train many constitutional scholars and judges and clerks and so on and so forth. But these guys are bringing this frivolous charge under the guise that they're defending the Constitution and the right of their constituency to call into question an election that Mr. Trump has been drumming up and saying it's fraudulent election. So some of his base is calling for yet another audit and a recount. And so in order to appease their base for 2022 and 2024, these senators are drumming up these charges.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about, Trump's tweet earlier this week saying that the vice president has the power to reject so-called fraudulently chosen electors. How do you reckon Mike Pence is feeling going into this joint session of Parliament? Because he'll ultimately have to announce Joe Biden as president-elect.
Yeah, so his role constitutionally is to simply attest to the verified, certified, tallies that have already been sealed and signed and delivered. They are brought into the chamber in a joint chamber session around 1:00 that he has to preside over, and then as they're announced for every state, he basically has to verify that that's the case. That's his role constitutionally. He doesn't have a role, based on my understanding, to overturn anything. But Mr. Trump, in a tweet, back and forth storm with New York Times and Washington Post and other journalists, he's basically getting into a tweet war about the fact that Mr. Pence may have such a right, which he doesn't in fact have.
Yeah.
So apparently Pence has said that he's going to he's an attorney himself. He's going to follow the letter of the law and certify Mr. Biden's win after a few objections are raised, which is part of the discussion. It has happened before in 2005 and even in 2017 when Mr. Biden was the vice president. There were some attempts to debate certain electoral votes, but they were completely sort of gavelled out by Mr. Biden himself. So there's a little bit of an irony here.
Yeah.
So because Democrats really hold the majority in the House, any objections ultimately will be overruled. And the senator from South Dakota, Mr. John Thune, has said that this is not going anywhere, these objections, that is, and that it's going to be brought down like a dead dog that's just been shot.
Yeah.
This is a direct quote from him. from his Twitter response to Mr. Trump. So, interestingly, as you said, Georgia has become a bit of a battleground, not unlike when William Tecumseh Sherman took Atlanta in 1864 during the Civil War.
Yeah. Look, Trump.
There's an interesting parallel here historically.
Yeah. Look, Trump.
Yes.
Trump said that on the campaign trail, didn't he? He said that he is a sore loser. He won't be able to handle winning. He said that while he was on the election campaign trail. And here we are. And January 20th, the inauguration day, is also looming. Nicola Sturgeon coming out quite strongly, saying that Scotland does not welcome Trump there. There's apparently been some discussion that his plane was meant to land in Scotland on the 19th of January. Ironically, I mean, how long can the president keep this up for?
Yeah, I can't verify that story. I know there's a story circulating that he's trying to clandestinely move to his golf course in Turnberry, I think it's called. Maybe Cape Town will take him, or Pretoria. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't verify that either, unfortunately. Dr. Sharma, thank you so much, as always, for talking to us here in South Africa, coming up for midnight there in New York. That's where Dr. Sharma joins us from, as we continue to track the U.S. election story. That joint session of Congress there now just hours away.